While many in Texas are still recovering from that deep freeze, the unanswered questions have turned the spotlight on the power grid. Ginger Zee in this week's It's Not Too Late breaks down why experts say this disaster is a reflection of how our changing climate can lead to extreme events and that it's crucial we prepare.
Hi, I'm Ginger Zee, and it's not too late. So now that our nation is thawing out and power's back on, it seems the questions and frustrations seem to be rising as quickly as the temperatures.
I've never imagined any of this was going to happen.
I mean, how in a world where we can see this in a forecast for at least a week in advance does a human catastrophe like this happen in 2021?
Our wind and our solar got shut down. It just shows that fossil fuel is necessary.
Oh no, the wind turbines did it? Really? Well, it turns out the turbines did freeze in Texas, but they only represent 20% of the Texas grid. But the main culprit, the deep chill that stalled natural gas production. Natural gas is what powers the bulk of Texas's electricity supply. But this was a failure from many different sources of energy, including coal.
We had snow covering solar panels. We had ice on wind turbines. We had natural gas supply constraints that caused a lot of problems with natural gas generation. We even saw problems with a nuclear plant that tripped offline.
The demand was simply too high, so they had to shut it down. There's also one big difference in Texas. Most of Texas is the only area in our country that is not on the national grid.
So during the kind of the mid to late part of the 20th century, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they have their authority to regulate the transmission infrastructure because of interstate commerce. The Texas utilities said, nope, we're not going to connect to any neighbors outside of Texas. So we will have a grid within Texas. So we're not subject to federal regulation.
Not subject to federal regulation, but also not able to have the backup. See, in each of these sections, if, say, the Great Lakes starts to go out of power, they can pull from the Dakotas. The
larger the interconnection, I think the more resilient that you are to unexpected difficulties.
What in the world does that even mean, though, the national grid? I mean, have you taken a moment to think about where your power comes from? We have a little primer. So the grid is the system that carries electricity from the source, and there could be many, to your home. But that route is not always a direct one, and not everybody is on the same grid.
So the electric power system is comprised of generators that provide the energy into the transmission network, and then that's delivered to the customers through distribution infrastructure. And it all has to work together. It works at the speed of light, where the supply needs to be matched exactly with the demand at all times.
ERCOT is similar to an air traffic controller. It doesn't own the airplanes or the runways, but it steps back and makes sure everything is flowing properly and efficiently.
When a lot of the utilities were going offline last week, ERCOT saw that they were just moments, and we're talking 4 minutes from epic shutdown. So they had no choice but to initiate rolling blackouts. Other states had rolling blackouts too last week, but theirs lasted minutes. In Texas, it was days. Jesse Jenkins says that the biggest failure, Texas didn't have an adequate plan to keep the power on in the event of a winter storm of this magnitude.
The calculus in Texas was that this was something, not that they didn't have to plan for, and what ended up happening is it was outside of the kind of even the extreme scenarios.
ERCOT CEO Bill Magnus told ABC News Live that they had to protect the grid from damage, and he acknowledged that the state's infrastructure just isn't set up for this type of cold weather. But he said that ERCOT doesn't have the authority to change that.
We're not the policymaker, and we're not the regulator. So if there are ideas after we review this event, as everyone does, regulators, industry, ERCOT, everyone else, that there need to be changes in that arena, absolutely.
Now, this event was historic. Dallas dipped to 2 below zero. That's their second coldest on record. Only ever been colder more than a century ago. But this isn't the first time that Texas has been that cold. It actually has happened a couple of times in recent history, both in December of 1989 and in February of 2011.
The big freeze of 2011 caused major headaches. We're talking about broken pipes, frozen pipes, rolling blackouts. something we never want to experience again.
Back in early February of 2011, they dropped into the single digits in El Paso.
You know, we're usually summer peaking utility. It's not so common, perhaps, that we have so much of these cold fronts, but perhaps that is changing. And so 10 years ago, when we learned the lesson here in the Sun City, we wanted to make sure that we were just as prepared.
And I don't know if you remember that map, but El Paso was one of the areas in Texas not managed by ERCOT, but rather they are on the national grid.
I think a lot of the conversations happened a decade ago when we had our experience. And I think as a community, we made that determination that those investments were going to pay off, and they proved that they did.
Granted, El Paso only dropped to 14 degrees last week, but they only had 3,000 customers without power. A third of those only lost it for 5 minutes. Here's the real kicker. That 2011 storm that got El Paso all motivated to invest in winter protection was the same storm that prompted the federal government to warn all of Texas that they were not prepared for extreme winter weather. They told them the extreme winter weather is inevitable. It was the same report that said that they had warned them the last time it happened in December of 1989. So will it change after this one? Jenkins says it would be well worth their time and money to prepare, because infrastructure, and we're talking all of it, beyond Texas, from California to Puerto Rico, needs to be what he calls future-proofed from extremes.
All of these kinds of events are exacerbated by climate change. And what that means is that the past isn't necessarily a good guide for the future anymore. So what we might have thought of as a once in 100-year flood or a once in 100-year drought, we just can't say that anymore, because the last 100 years is not a guide for the next 100 years.
It's time to prepare, and I promise it's not too late.
Time to prepare. Our thanks to Ginger for that.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.